This may not be history yet, but it has a lot to do with it, and it will be. Nothing stirs my fascination like a good shipwreck story, and of course, the most famous story of them all is the Titanic, and I've promised myself I'll never even attempt to retell that story on this channel because so many have done it before me and done such a great job. But we can't ignore present day history and what's going on in the Atlantic right now at the wreck site of the Titanic and the souls lost in the sea as we speak. This week on Historsea, the story of the Titan submersible diving down to see that great wreck, the people on board, and the massive search effort to save them as the world waits with bated breath. The wreck of the Titanic lies at a depth of about 12,500 feet or 3,800 meters, about 370 nautical miles off the coast of Newfoundland. It lies in two main pieces, about 2,000 feet or 600 meters apart. The bow is still recognizable, we see it in pictures all the time, with many of the interiors inside that section preserved, despite deterioration and damage it sustained when it hit the seafloor. In contrast, the stern is completely ruined. It's a debris field around the wreck that contains hundreds of thousands of items spilled from the ship as she sank. The bodies of the passengers and crew would have also been distributed across the seabed, but have since been consumed by sea organisms. While we tried to find the wreck of the Titanic for 70 years, we finally found it in the 1980s, 73 years after she sank, using some newer technology, a system called Argo and Jason. Argo is a remote-operated deep-sea vessel with sonar and cameras that's towed behind a surface ship. Once Argo is at depth, it tows Jason. Jason is a robot on a tether, and Jason reaches the sea floor. In the 1980s, this technology made it possible to actually find the Titanic because Jason would broadcast pictures and sensor readings directly back to the surface ship in real time to aid in the search. Finally, in 1986, in a submersible vehicle called DSV Alvin, humans actually reached the depths of the Titanic and laid eyes on her for the first time since she sank. By the late 90s, hundreds of visits down to the Titanic had been made by professional dive teams and scientists, and they started bringing back thousands of artifacts from the wreckage. Some people didn't like this. They thought disturbing the grave was the wrong thing to do. Which brings us to today, and Oceangate, the tourism and research company offering to bring civilian non-professionals down to see the Titanic. For the small fee of $250,000, Oceangate offers a ride in their submersible craft called Titan. While Oceangate does a lot of deep-sea shipwreck sort of visity stuff, in their fleet of submarines, Titan is the one that's not completely tested. The CEO of Oceangate, Stockton Rush, did take the craft down to just over 3,000 meters recently for about 10 hours, but the craft has not been evaluated or approved of by any organization, including the Coast Guard. For the trip they were planning all the way down to the Titanic at an untested depth of 3,800 meters, on board would be that CEO again, Stockton Rush. In 1981, Rush obtained his DC-8 type captain's rating at the United Airlines Jet Training Institute at the age of 19, making him the youngest jet transport rated pilot in the world at the time. He then obtained his Bachelor's of Science in Aerospace and Engineering from Princeton University in 1984, and then an MBA from UC Berkeley in 1989. That year, he built Glass Air 3, an experimental aircraft, which he still flies to this day. He also finished a heavily modified Kittredge K350, a two-person submersible, in which he's conducted more than 30 dives, so he's an adventurer with some considerable experience. The second passenger on board for this trip would be Hamish Harding. Hamish is a British aviation businessman and a seasoned adventurer who posted on social media before the trip that he was set to make the journey to the Titanic wreckage on the Titan, and he said, "This mission is likely to be the first and only manned mission to the Titanic in 2023. Harding was also an aircraft pilot and the founder and chairman of Action Aviation, a United Arab Emirates-based company that buys and sells aircraft, so he made a lot of money. This Briton, who is in his late 50s now, also chairs on the Middle East chapter of the Explorers Club, which is this multidisciplinary professional society dedicated to the advancement of the field of research and scientific exploration and resource conservation, apparently. Harding was a passenger last year on the 5th human spaceflight of Blue Origin, the private space company founded by Jeff Bezos, who also is the honorary chair of the Explorers Club. The third passenger is P.H. Nargeolet. Nargeolet is considered one of the world's leading authorities on the Titanic wreck site. He's led several expeditions to the Titanic and completed 37 test dives in the Titan submersible. He has also supervised the recovery of some 5,000 artifacts from the wreck of the Titanic. The next passengers are British-Pakistani businessman Shahzada Dawood. He's 48 years old, and his son, Suleman, 19. They were going on the expedition too. They are one of Pakistan's most prominent business families. Shahzada is vice chairman of Pakistani conglomerate Engro Corp, which has a mix of industrial interests including fertilizers, textiles, and food. The Titan itself is a fairly basic design. It's basically a carbon fiber tube with 5-inch thick walls, sealed off on either end by titanium end caps. There's one way into the tube and one way out by unbolting the 17 bolts on one of the ends, which can only be unbolted from the outside. This is the same arrangement used on the Apollo 1 spacecraft, which ended tragically when a fire broke out inside the craft and the engineers couldn't get the bolts undone fast enough to evacuate the crew, and all 3 souls aboard were lost. Inside the Titan is sparse, to say the least, a cushioned platform where the 5 occupants would sit sort of cross-legged and bunched up, a few screens to monitor navigation and ship systems, and a PlayStation 3 wireless game controller is rigged up to maneuver the craft. This is something that they showed in press release pictures and was quickly identified as a PlayStation 3 controller, and again, it's the wireless version. The Oceangate website has specs listed for the Titan craft and claims the life support system on board will support the lives of 5 people for as much as 96 hours, though how this might have been tested or proven isn't made clear. On Friday, June 16th, the primary surface vessel for the excursion, called the Polar Prince, she's an old icebreaker converted for deep-sea missions like this, left St. John's, Newfoundland, arriving 370 nautical miles away at the dive site the next day. On June 18th at 9 a.m., the process begun launching the Titan with its 5 passengers, and it began its slow descent toward the wreck of the Titanic. It takes hours to reach the sea floor, but everything was operating as they expected until 1 hour and 47 minutes into the descent when everything went dark. The surface ship, the Polar Prince, has a data link with the Titan, and it uses that link to monitor the Titan's position. And all of a sudden it was lost, but this was somewhat expected, as the same thing happened during testing. At certain depths, the signal just doesn't penetrate the depths of the ocean. All the surface team could do now was wait. What had happened during testing before was the data link would be restored when the Titan began to ascend, but this time nothing happened. For hours, the surface team waited eagerly as the planned time for the Titan to resurface approached. 6:10 p.m. was the scheduled time that they should see the Titan hit the surface, but she never showed up. The surface team continued to wait 15 more minutes until finally, figuring out that there was something going on, there's some sort of emergency, the Polar Prince contacted the Coast Guard and asked for help. Immediately, the U.S. Navy swung into action and sent in the Cavalry, a deep-sea expedition, subject matter experts, as well as the FADOSS system, which stands for Flyaway Deep Ocean Salvage System. Basically, this is a very sophisticated crane mounted on a ship that lowers a submersible to great depths, and it can salvage anything to a claimed 60,000 pounds. The news headlines started too at this point, and the world took notice, immediately starting to scrutinize Oceangate, as they do. The company does have some policies which might be disagreeable. They take a very experimental approach to their craft. And they also prefer to hire their team right out of college rather than having the people that have been doing this for 50 years. They hire sort of college kids. They're more inspirational that way. That's what the CEO said in interviews. In a 2021 court filing as well, things get a little bit weird. In this court filing, Oceangate's legal representative touted that the specifications of the Titan vessel and that it had a hull monitoring system that he called an unparalleled safety feature. This legal representative informed the U.S. District Court of the company's expedition plans at the time, including going down to see the Titanic. This filing lays out the Titan's testing details and its specifications, including that it had undergone more than 50 test dives, and detailing its 5-inch thick carbon fiber and titanium hull. But this is where it gets weird. The filing said Oceangate's vessel was the result of more than 8 years of work, including detailed engineering and development work under a $5 million contract awarded to the University of Washington's Applied Physics Laboratory. But according to the University of Washington, the laboratory never dealt with the design or engineering of Oceangate's Titan vessel. In a statement to CNN's Kevin Williams, the executive director of the university's Applied Physics Laboratory said they only were ever involved in shallow water implementation, and the laboratory was not involved in the design, the engineering, or the testing of the Titan at all. As rescue ships rushed to the scene on Tuesday, a Canadian P-3 aircraft with sonar detection equipment flew patterns over the area and detected a sound that sounded like banging, which immediately we might all assume the occupants of the Titan might bang on the hull, knowing that we would be using sonar devices to try to find them. The banging sounds were heard every half hour for about 4 hours. By this time, several vessels had been dispatched from different countries to aid in the search. Also, the Explorers Club, the one we talked about that Jeff Bezos is chair of, they're trying to get Magellan to aid in the search. Magellan is a deep-sea mapping company best known for its one-of-a-kind deep-sea imagery of the Titanic wreck, and they operate some of the world's most sophisticated deep-sea diving equipment capable of reaching the seafloor and searching for the Titan. Magellan engaged right away with a request. They said that they need an aircraft to move their equipment from the UK to the coast of Canada right away, asking the US or the UK Royal Air Force to make use of a C-17 Globemaster, but no news has come on that yet. David Gallo, a renowned oceanographer, said Tuesday that he was hopeful after the banging sounds were heard during the search for the missing Titan submersible, and teams might not want to wait to get assets there. He says, "My hope is that they spent a lot of time trying to get assets to the location where they heard the banging coming from. Time is of the essence, because once you have an area where you know the sounds are coming from, you have very limited amount of time to find them alive. Submarines and robots need to be dispatched immediately to investigate." And here's what's on the scene right now. The US and Canadian Coast Guards have vessels there. A 194-meter or 630-foot-long pipe-laying vessel showed up. It was in the area because it has underwater capabilities. Medical assistant ships, including one Canadian vessel with a mobile medical decompression chamber, showed up. The research ship Atlante from France with its underwater robot showed up. The U.S. FDOSS ship, U.S. military assets, 2 C-130 aircrafts are circling overhead, and an Air National Guard HC-130J Combat King flew 900 miles to be overhead, where they deployed infrared radar systems. David Gallo, that leading oceanographer, said, "The sounds of underwater banging in the search for the missing sub have echoes of our futile search for MH370, the Malaysian Airlines flight that disappeared from radar in 2014 and was never found." He said, "When I first heard about the banging, I said, 'Oh no, here we go again.' In the search for the Malaysian Airlines flight, we heard banging quite often, and it always turned out to be something different." He goes on to say, but authorities probably will start moving ships and tools in that direction, whether it's identified or not what the banging was, because time is short. Gallo's company owns the exclusive salvage rights at the Titanic wreck site. He said that the banging on the hull to transmit noise is something that P.H. Nargeolet would certainly do. P.H. is one of the passengers on board, and he's a renowned explorer. He knows to do that. Gallo goes on to say, one of the wonders I have is, did the searchers make any sound signal back acoustically to signal to the sub that we hear you banging? Sound carries very easily through the ocean, and you would hear it in the sub for sure. Historsea is a newer channel, and I could really use your help and support. If you could, please give this video a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. Both of those things are free for you, and they would really mean the world to me. This leads us to today, Wednesday, June 21st. More banging sounds were heard today by the research and rescue vessels over sonar, and they have in fact moved a lot of ships and tools toward where those noises are coming from. With the PH guy, the great adventurer, on board, it stands to reason that the banging on the hull of Titan is something that he probably would do. The U.S. Coast Guard released a statement today that read, "This is still 100% a search and rescue mission, not a salvage or recovery mission, and as the situation stands at the moment, the world still waits with bated breath." The vessel's claimed 96 hours of life support with 5 people on board will run out sometime tomorrow, Thursday, and any and every means of rescue vessel has been sent. When a distress call is issued by maritime law, any and all vessels capable of assisting without endangering themselves are required to do so. And the entire world received this distress call, and throwing everything we have into rendering aid. Our hopes and prayers are with the 5 souls on board and their families and all of the rescue workers, while the maritime world does its best to render that aid. All we can do now is wait. This has been another Historsea episode, and I will see you next week.